talk now. This MMA, what we talking about? Yeah, you tuned into the pod now. Gonna be hard for you to stop now. Yeah, we caged in. Yeah, we caged in. Yeah, we caged in.
Welcome back to another episode of Caged In. I'm your host, Chris DiCarlo. Got a very special guest on the line with me today. It's Dylan Nadler from MindLock Mental Training. How we doing today, my man?
I'm good, man. I'm good. Thanks for having me. How you doing?
I'm doing great, man. Thanks for coming on the show. I appreciate it. This is a different kind of interview than what I'm used to. Normally I'm interviewing fighters and talking to them as they're getting ready to, go in the cage and throw down. So this is like a different avenue for me. So I'm glad to be doing it. I'm excited. I think it's important. So, thanks for coming on the show and doing this, man. It's pretty awesome.
Of course. Yeah, it'll be fun to get into it.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I know that you have a background in, combat sport as well. You do have a pretty deep background in Taekwondo, and you were very accomplished in what you did. So before we dive into MindLock and the company that you started, I do want to dive into your, Taekwondo background a little bit, man. So just tell me your story with that. Go through your accolades and, your experiences and your journeys through the sport of Taekwondo.
For sure. Yeah. So, my parents put me in Taekwondo when I was 5. And like any sort of traditional martial art like Taekwondo, karate, and stuff like that, I wasn't at a very kind of competitive gym. So I spent a lot of, probably my first 7 years just, getting the belts and progressing and learning the patterns and stuff like that. But for me, like I always wanted to compete, and that was always my passion. Like the very first time we got to spar, I knew like, okay, I love this thing. And it was frustrating because we didn't get a chance to at that place. It just wasn't a competitive gym. So I eventually, switched over to a more competitive club in Toronto called Authentic Taekwondo. And from there is really when I started to understand like the levels to what it means to compete and to fight at a high level. And I had a lot of work to do, honestly. I had a black belt at the time, but my skill set was nowhere near the level that I needed to be. And I was surrounded by a lot of teammates that were my age and, which was helpful in a sense, but also the direct comparison was there too of like, man, I'm just not on this level. So it took me, that whole year to really kind of figure myself out, develop the right techniques and the right skills and learn how to fight the right way, not just to be aggressive and just kind of throw down. And, I had a lot of success kind of by the end of that year, winning my first Ontario provincial championships and then nationals later on that January.
Nice.
And then from there, it just kind of kept going. I mean, we competed very often, very internationally. You name it, all these different countries from Taipei, Korea, Belgium, Spain, Netherlands, Mexico, just all over the world representing Canada at the highest level. I was named captain of the Canadian national team, which was really cool.
Oh, yeah.
So I had a chance to represent, obviously, my country at the highest level as the captain, which is cool, and take on that leadership role. I was able to win the U.S. Open in back-to-back years as one of the first Canadians to do that. So, the U.S. Open is one of the most prestigious, largest international events in the sport, and to win it once is a big deal, let alone kind of back to back. So that was a really cool moment for me as well. So, within that, really kind of just starting to find myself in the sport, finally get to a place where my skill set matched my kind of passion and my drive for it, and ultimately, reaching a national rank of number 1 and a world rank in the top 40. All before I was like 18 or 19. So it was a cool ride, and it was something that was really special to me. And a lot of who I am is because of the lessons I learned through sport.
For sure, man. That's awesome. Congratulations on, the success you found in Taekwondo, man. That's awesome. Very accomplished career you had. And that brings us to MindLock, man, kind of transitioning from your background as an athlete. How did you get into creating this brand and this company, MindLock, and just talk about what it is and down to its core and the goals that you have for the company, man?
Mm-hmm. So for me, even going back to the story I just told about, competing myself, I was forced to recognize right away how mental this game is. Combat sports, non-combat sports, competing in general, but especially combat sports, right? There's so many elements to it, right? Mm-hmm. When you get to a high level, everybody's pretty explosive. Everybody's pretty flexible. Everybody knows the same kicks and punches and comes from a good club. So what separates the winner from the loser sometimes it's those things, but when all of those kind of physical skills are evenly matched, it's the mental side. It's that kind of mindset variable that really makes a big impact. And I learned that a lot of times, like, I learned my lesson in, the tough way, and I was forced to kind of build up those skills. And like I said, being in a place where I had to catch up very quickly, I knew if I just did the same things everybody else was doing around me, I would improve, but I wouldn't surpass where everybody else was if I was doing the same thing. So I had to figure out, what else can I do, right? If
Right.
everybody else is doing one thing, how do I do that plus one, kind of in a
Mhm.
way? And for me, it was really leaning into the mental stuff, whether it was, game planning and watching game tape and breaking down opponents, whether it was going through different visualizing activities and exercises and trying to kind of envision the environment around me, stuff like that too, and taking that into fights and events, and doing well with it. So I always had this understanding of how crucial the mental component was. And for me, it always really baffled me how little training and access there was to something like this on a global scale, competing around the world and looking at other national teams and national team programs, and seeing that everybody has nutritionists, everybody has physiotherapists,
Mhm.
but there's nothing on the mental side, right? So I
Right.
always knew, like, okay, this is something that I wanted to do. And as soon as I was done competing, it was a pretty instantaneous switch of, all right, I know it worked for me. I bet it can work for other people too. Let's just see how much. And that was when that kind of adjustment was made. And the moment I stopped competing, it was, all right, let's see what this can be done for everybody else.
Right. And is this something that, you had education behind, like you went to school for this stuff as well, and kind of that's how you kind of came up with this idea to start MindLock?
So I graduated from the University of Ottawa with an honors degree in psychology. So I have that background, but
Mhm.
not when I started. When I
Right.
started, I really I used a lot of intuition. I really leaned into my own athletic experience. I really tried to do my own kind of studying, and tried to kind of surpass just like the pace that you learn in school. Because for me, it was kind of frustrating how slow that process was, and I've
Yeah, for
never
sure.
really been a fan of school. So I always tried to kind of like be ahead of the curve, do as much as I could. And the way that I thought about it was, listen, if it works, it works. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But at least I'll know, right? I didn't
Right.
want to be in this limbo of like, I feel like it works. I don't know if I should try it. How do I know when I've put together the right program? I was just like, you know what? I'm going to try this out, and I'll let the market tell me if it works or if it doesn't work. If people like working with me and they work with me month to month and they're getting results from it, great. If people work with me and they kind of stop after a little bit, or they're not getting the results, or they're not that satisfied, well, then I know that there's a lot more work that needs to be done. Let's kind of put that on the shelf and revisit it. So I kind of went straight into execution, and I was like,
Mhm.
I'm just gonna take action right now and learn as I go. And I think that's the reason why we were able to kind of grow so quickly, and I was able to learn as quick as I did, just through action, really.
For sure. And your brand MindLock, if an athlete's listening to this right now and they wanted to, get involved and work with you, kind of what's the avenue that they could go down to, contact you, and what kind of services do you offer to athletes that are looking to get into the mental training space?
So, Instagram's a great place to go, just because that's where a lot of the content is housed, and also links to other stuff. So podcasts, YouTube channel, stuff like that.
Mhm.
A DM is usually the best way. I'm always there. I'm always on my phone anyway. So even if
Sure.
it's just out of curiosity, even if it's not about wanting to work together, it's just a question or a
Hmm.
comment or whatever, send that message. I love kind of going back and forth and interacting with people. But in
For
terms
sure.
of how it works, at MindLock, obviously we work with high performance athletes to develop the mental game, but what that really looks like is, it looks like creating programs that enhance and develop different areas of those mental skills, right? So mental
Mhm.
skills like goal setting and preparation, and visualizing, imagery, self-talk, optimism, discipline, motivation, right? All the different kind of pillars, if you will, of what it means to be kind of quote unquote mentally tough,
Mhm.
strengthening that one step at a time, the exact same way that we would strengthen physical skills, right? So if you want to be
Right.
a fighter, you have to have good flexibility, good endurance, you have to be technical, you have to be able to, kind of have good mobility and move around a lot, good defense. So the same way that you build up kind of piece by piece on the physical side, that's what we do on the mental side. So we take these kind of bigger, broader, more abstract kind of concepts, and turn them into tools that can be used to make an instant impact right away. So,
Mhm.
another thing with this is that you don't need to wait 6 months or a year to start to feel something. I think that that's just I just don't think that's helpful for anybody. I don't think
For
anyone
sure.
should have to kind of trust the process that long. It's a little bit less tangible in terms of, if I can lift 50 pounds today and, 75 pounds 2 weeks from now, I know I'm getting stronger. It's a
Right.
little bit tougher on the mental side. But that being said, these are formatted in a way where there's instantly things you can take out of it, skills you're able to acquire right away, where oftentimes as soon as we're done our first session and an athlete goes into training, that night or the next day, they're noticing improvements. And, for me, that's always what I look for, is how quickly can we make the impact you're looking for, because not everybody has 6 weeks for a camp. Sometimes you have a short notice thing and you have 10 days to figure it out. It's enough if we do it the right way too. Of course, over time, we're able to kind of strengthen that and build on it more, but it doesn't have to be a very kind of long process too. So that's also how we work together. So we'll do sessions online through video call. So like Skype or FaceTime or whatever they have.
Right.
Lasts about 45 to 60 minutes depending on what we're doing, but we'll work through those different kind of exercises and tool developments, and they'll get an email afterwards with a complete breakdown of what we went through, links to
Yeah.
everything, activities to kind of comb over, screenshot and share and save so that they have access to it, and just kind of keeping up with that on a recurring basis, as well as kind of having access to me at all times too. So, we might not have a session scheduled for a week from now, but if something comes up like tonight in training, sending a text or an email or a DM and keeping that conversation going is important as well. So that's kind of the breakdown of how it works kind of structurally,
Yeah.
and what we look to do when it comes to bringing an athlete on board.
For sure, man. This is kind of like a new wave of training that I think is kind of catching fire, and it's very important. As you just outlined, a lot of those things are very important when it comes to preparation for an athlete and everything like that. So I ended up, I'm not an athlete myself anymore. Maybe in a past life, but now I'm just a podcast host who has a microphone. So I reached out to a lot of my friends who are active athletes. I talked to a lot of fighters on this show. A lot of them have become good friends of mine. So to prep for this and to ask you questions that I think are actually important and matter to like the athletes that might be listening, I figured let me reach out to them and ask them, what they would want to ask you, just so that I know that the things that I'm asking are stuff that actually matters, So I do have some questions from them. Hopefully this helps, balance the show and, make this thing a little bit more interesting and purposeful. So, let's just get right into it, man. For someone who is, getting into the mental aspect, the mental training aspect, or somebody wants to add this to their, fight camp or their regimen, what would you recommend is the first step for someone to, start adding this to their game?
Do you mean this in terms of like getting something set up, or in terms of like a tool that they can start with?
Yeah, like I think as far as like a tool that they can start with, like would you put the, like visualization, what kind of stuff would you add to their game if you could, just to like start off as like a starter pack?
Yeah, no, good question. So typically the best way to get started is by really clearly outlining kind of what their goals are. And most of the time when people hear goals, they think long-term stuff, right? I want to be a champ. I want to be in the UFC, whatever.
Right.
Yeah, that's great. But at the same time, that's not special in any way, and anybody can say what their goals are, but without that accountability and that kind of process-based thinking, you're just kind of saying it and moving on. And that's why a lot of people have this tendency to kind of like set and forget, where they just say their goals and they move on and they say, well, goal setting makes sense, but it's not for me. So, one of the things we emphasize right away is breaking that down into much smaller steps, even down to planning for your next event and your next training session even. So, as an example, if you're a fighter that's getting started and I say, okay, when's your next fight? And they say 6 weeks. My question is, well, what's your goal, for that fight? And it's kind of a funny question, because you're like, well, what do you mean? What's I want to win, obviously, right? My goal is to win. That's why I'm going out there. And what I always try to emphasize too is like, well, listen, winning isn't actually a goal, it's an outcome, right? Winning is just the result of what happens when you do the right things.
Right.
So when you want to set a goal for this next fight, what you really should be thinking about is, what are those right things? What process do I need to follow? So for example, it might be things like keeping your hands up, good defense, moving well, working your jab, having sharp counters, being coachable, being confident. So the ingredients of a good performance, right? Because if you have the ingredients of a good performance and you put that together, well, odds are you're probably going to get closer to that result. So that's usually something that we work on right away, is okay, what are your goals, not just in a broad sense in the macro, but specifically in terms of this next event that's coming up, for your training sessions that are coming up, for the day to day? What can we do right away to get you closer to that result that you want without only focusing on the outcome? And that's kind of something that we can do right from jump.
For sure. If you had to outline, just like a mental training program for someone to take into them for fight camp, kind of what would just like the outlines be, if like the points that you want to hit that you would recommend for somebody during their fight camp leading up to a fight?
So, depending on how much time they have to prepare, I think the big components of kind of a mental training program or something to follow, or the structure of that, like I said, it starts with that goal setting model, that I
Right.
just talked about. And from there, you add on different components. So, number one might be self-talk, right? So self-talk is how we speak to ourselves, the words that we use, and how we more importantly reframe things. So what you'll notice in the camp is there's a lot of ups and downs, a lot of
Mhm.
highs and lows, days that feel great and days that feel not so great, right? So
Right.
how do you handle those days that don't feel so great? So, for example, you might be in a situation where you're cutting weight and it's the end of, that kind of weight cut ish, and you have no energy and you feel like a zombie and you're like, man, I just feel so shitty today. I'm
Right.
like, how am I going to do well at this fight if I just can't even lift my legs today? And
Mhm.
it's reframing that to, what, my capacity is much smaller than it has been. So all I have to do now is just do the best that I can with what I've got.
Right.
Looking at things like teammates that push you really hard, and sometimes be like, man, I really don't want to go with that guy. He always beats me up. Reframing that to, I'm so grateful to be at a gym where I have teammates that can really push me and teammates
Mhm.
that can make me feel nervous, because feeling nervous in training is a blessing, right? It's very tough at a high level. Anyone can push you and anyone can challenge you, but to feel nervous is a special thing. And even though it's not a fun feeling, it's a valuable one, because if you can be comfortable experiencing those nerves in training and overcoming them, it's great preparation for the event as well, right? So
Right.
reframing how we think about things is important. And like I kind of touched on before, that is really managing our expectations. So, your expectations of yourself in week 1 of camp is going to be very different than your expectations in week 4 and week 6, and stuff like that. So constantly refreshing, what is the criteria for success this week, right? The
For
same way that when you're in high school or university and you have to write a paper and there's like a rubric to follow,
Mhm.
that's what you're getting marked on, right? I'm following this rubric, I'm following this criteria. I know that these are the bullet points I have to check off. It's the same thing with training. What is my criteria for success this week? What is the outline that I want to follow? So, for an athlete that's, kind of engaged in a mental training program, starts with goals, it leads into managing expectations. We have things like visualizing and self-talk to help guide it along the way, and we end up kind of tapering down near the end, and really trying to peak for what that event is. So there's a ton that can get involved in this. It also depends on what the athlete likes and what they want to emphasize, but there's a ton of really cool things that we can do to kind of help get you to a place where you're peaking right at the right time.
For sure, man, for sure. We mentioned at the top of the show that this kind of seems like a industry that's kind of on fire right now, where mental health training has become kind of like the new aspect that people are adding to their training. Do you feel like this is still something that goes overlooked for athletes?
I totally do. I think, to your point, I think we're at a place now where athletes are understanding that the mental game is important, whereas maybe back in the day they didn't, right? Back in the day it was more like, what is that and why does it matter? Now I think we're at a place where the average athlete understands, the importance of that, but where we're not at is knowing what to do about that, right? So you might be listening to this going, yeah, that makes total sense. Everything you're saying makes sense. And I also understand the mental game, and that the mental game is important, and that fighting is very mental. But then there's still that next question of, where do I go? What do I do? How do I know if this person's legit or if it's helpful? So I think that's the next area that we're in, and that next challenge of, okay, people are realizing that it's important, but not too sure what those next steps are. And I think that that's kind of what I'm trying to do too, is really kind of bring this stuff to light, educate people on what this is, why it's helpful, how we can work, and really start to overcome that next hurdle, which is making it accessible to, anybody and everybody.
For sure, man. Taking that and bringing it into competition as well is obviously very important. So how do people, prepare for competition and become more confident in themselves mentally. Because I think confidence, people always say, is one of the biggest aspects of competition, is making sure that you're going into competition with as much confidence as possible. So through the mental training aspect of things, how is someone able to build that confidence before they go into competition?
Confidence is huge, right? And it's a tough thing because people are like, well, how do I build confidence? What's the secret? The secret is that, preparation leads to confidence, and it's not that much of a secret, right? The more prepared you are for something, the easier it is to feel confident, right? If you have a pop quiz that you didn't study for, it's hard to feel confident. Whereas if you studied all week, you're probably going to feel better about it. So it all starts with preparation and making sure that you're training the right way, you're disciplined, you're doing the right things. So, really leaning in on that preparation and reminding yourself of that, right before you go out there and compete, whether it's a week before, the night before, right when you're standing in that ring, really reminding yourself of how much you prepared for this, because you always look across at the ring and go, what's this guy going to bring at me? Or what's this girl going to do? And it's like, you know what? They can do whatever they want, but they have to get through me, right? And I've done all the right things to lead up to this point. So I think a second part of that is if part one is leaning into preparation, part two is really bringing the focus and the attention back to you instead of really emphasizing the opponent, right? You watch a lot of game tape, you study the opponent, and you start to know, like, they've got a really good kind of overhand right? I know I need to look for that. They're really good at closing the distance and clinching, right? We start to figure out what the opponent does, but the only problem with that is that when we're face to face, all we're seeing is their strengths. All we're seeing is, oh man, I've watched all these videos. I know what they want to do to me. It's reminding yourself of, well, what do I bring to the table? What do I bring that they're forced to manage? They could have the best game plan in the world, but they've got to go through me first, right? So I think the second part of being confident is really reminding yourself of what you bring to the table and leaning into that preparation to remind yourself of, listen, this person might think that they're ready for me, but until that fight starts and they have to really kind of face me and feel this presence, they have no idea what they're in for. And I think, between the preparation standpoint and reminding yourself of who you are compared to just who the opponent is, I think that's a big deal as well.
Definitely. Why do some athletes kind of crumble under pressure while some excel under pressure? Does that go back towards the mental training aspect of preparing for, said competition?
100%. I think, you look at the fight game, right, or all sports in general, and you ask somebody how much of competing is mental versus physical, right? Mm-hmm. You'll get different answers. Minimum is 50-50. Some people go all the way up and they say it's 90 or 99% mental. Let's call it 50-50. Let's keep it conservative and say it's 50% mental, 50% physical. Well, let's look at what athletes are doing to prepare, right? Whether it's strength and conditioning, or it's cardio, or it's supplements, or it's sleep, or it's cryo, or it's stretching. It's almost 100% physical. So what happens when you go out there and compete and there's the pressure and there's the cameras and there's the opponent and there's the crowd? Mm-hmm. Well, only kind of, 50% of the game is mental, and we didn't really do anything about that. Well, what do you expect to happen? Of course, the pressure is going to overwhelm you, and there's a tendency to underperform and to kind of crumble under, those circumstances. So the way I like to see it too is that, there's a huge discrepancy between the impact of the mental game on our performance compared to the emphasis that we put on developing those skills and those mental skills. So why do some athletes crumble under the pressure? A lot of the time it can be traced back to that discrepancy, which is, listen, think about how much of this game is mental compared to how much kind of preparation went into that mental side. If it doesn't add up, you're in a vulnerable spot, right? And I think a lot of it can get traced back to that.
For sure. How does mental training differ from someone who's in an individual sport versus a team sport? I'm sure, some of it might be the same. There might be some stuff that overlaps, but then there might also be some aspects of mental training that are different when it comes to individual versus team sport.
And that's a really good question too. There's a lot of similarities and a lot of differences. In an individual sport, it's just you that goes in there, but at the same time, there's a lot of team components to it. So take fighting as an example. Fighting is an individual sport. You're the only one in that ring. No one's there to help you. However, you couldn't have gotten there without your team, right? And without your corner. So I think MMA and combat sports are an interesting one where there's a big team component to it as well. But in individual sports, the focus really has to be on motivating yourself, allowing yourself to spark that sense of confidence, being mindful of the things that you're saying to yourself, because you don't have a team to kind of reassure you in that moment, right? If I'm on a football team and I'm having a bad game, one of my teammates can come up to me, between plays and say, "Hey man, keep your head up, you're doing great," right?
Right.
In an individual sport, we don't really have that, right? So you really have to focus on that self-talk portion. What am I saying to myself? How am I communicating? Am I communicating to myself in a positive way, in a constructive way, or in a negative way, in a way that brings me down? So, for individual sports, a lot of the time it's about what do those narratives look like in your own head, and how do we make sure that you're always striving for something positive and productive? Whereas in a team sport, that's important too, but there's also other variables and, things like team dynamic. So while the pros of team sports is that you have more support and you have more teammates that can come in and help you out, there's also a lot more variables that are totally out of your control. You could be playing the best game of your life. If you're a hockey player and you're lighting it up, but if, none of your teammates are involved or pulling their weight and the intensity is down and, it just doesn't seem like they want it, or they're making silly mistakes, it's very easy for you to start feeling like, oh my God, what else can I do, guys? Like I'm doing everything I can, like meet me halfway. So there's another frustration and stress around managing your team. So, the solution there also, I mean, there's a ton to work on, but it really is focusing on just playing the best game that you can play and trying to take a leadership role on with your teammates and understanding how to motivate everybody else. Because even if you're on fire and everybody else isn't, it's not enough to usually get you to where you want to be. So it's a mix of sparking that fire in your teammates, but also not taking it personally when it's just not there. Because a lot of the time we associate with our team identity and lose track of our own. So if you're on a team and the team's losing, but you're playing great, a lot of the time your identity becomes, oh, I'm a loser, and this team sucks and I suck. And it's like, well, you don't suck. You're doing great. Your individual performance is awesome and you're living up to these goals. The results on paper might not be matching, but don't tie your identity into your team's record, right? So whether it's an individual sport or it's a team sport, there's different dynamics to it, which are very different, but then there are a lot of similarities too, which is that it starts and ends with you.
Right. I think that's very interesting, man, the way you broke that down. I think it is important for people to realize the similarities and the differences between team sport versus individual. So, it was really well said the way you just broke that down. Do you think that there are athletes out there that just can't develop, mental toughness, as they say, or do you think that it is something that it will always be, teachable or trainable?
I think that everybody kind of has a spectrum of what they're capable of, right? I think there are some people that are born with incredible toughness and grit and motivation, and there's some people that aren't, right? But I don't think it's just kind of this dichotomy of either you have it or you don't have it. I think there's a spectrum in which you can stretch it out. So maybe, on a scale of 1 to 10, you're an 8 and you can get that to a 10 with some training. Maybe you're a 4 and it's just hard for you to bring up that intensity and that like competitiveness, but you can probably stretch that out to like a 6 or a 7, right? So I think everybody has their own kind of spectrum of where they're at and what their potentials are. And I think that everybody can benefit for that reason alone of take what you've got and do more with it. Whether you come into this and you're struggling with certain things and you know what you want to work on and we build that up, or if you come into, a mental training program with a ton of toughness, a ton of grit, and you don't have any kind of issues per se, you can stretch that out too. Because a lot of the time, if you come into something like this with a great foundation and no kind of problems, it means that, we can get right into adding those tools right away, stretching things out. And if you already feel great without that type of training, imagine how good you could feel and how much better you could perform with the right resources as well. So I wouldn't say it's a you have it or you don't type of thing, but I also, will say that some people just have a greater capacity to develop than others, but everybody is moldable. Everybody has their own ceiling. And I think for that reason alone, when we look at long-term goals, our goal should always be to become the best version of ourselves as opposed to something external, right? Because if I'm a basketball player, maybe my best isn't the NBA, but my best is playing on, an international pro team, or my best is playing on my local state team or my college team. So it's like, it's important to set these big goals to motivate yourself. But the bottom line, and I think the way that we really achieve the most kind of satisfaction and fulfillment in sport, is just striving to be the best version of yourself and trusting that with that comes a lot of the accolades that you want along the way.
For sure, man. I liken it to like the sense of like going to the gym, right? You go into the gym the first day and maybe you're able to bench press 100 pounds, and you're never going to be that guy in the gym that goes in there and benches 300 pounds, but you can get your bench up to 200. So I understand what you're saying from that aspect, but putting the numbers to it kind of makes it seem a little bit more understandable as well. Let's talk about mental pressure a little bit, man. Like a lot of these athletes, they naturally put a lot of mental pressure on themselves. A lot of them are striving to be the best in the world, and that itself comes with a lot of pressure. So how would you say for these athletes that are, have these lofty goals and every day they're going into the gym to be the best, how would you say that they can manage that pressure that they naturally put on themselves?
And that's a real thing, right? Pressure, and especially kind of pressure that comes from yourself, can be a real killer. A little bit of it is important because you need a little bit of that anxiety and that nervousness to keep you sharp and to keep you on your toes. The moment you get too complacent is when you start to kind of go downhill. So, pressure in a way is good, but not to the point where it becomes so overwhelming that you're unable to just perform. And I think circling back to the goal setting thing that I talked about a couple times, right, that's usually a really good place to start with people like that, because when you look at pressure, a lot of the time it stems from results-based thinking, which is, I need to be in the UFC, or I need to win this fight. And the pressure comes from, but fuck, what if I don't? Right? That's where that pressure comes from. So, usually what's helpful is to start to stray away from those results and outcome-based goals and going back into the process stuff. So it's like, okay, of course you want to win this fight, but what are the things you need to do within that fight to be successful? Like, okay, well, I need to keep my hands up, I need to move well, and you need to work my low kicks, I need to be able to, close the distance really quickly. And it's like, okay, well, focus on that. Because as soon as that match starts, instead of stressing about, am I going to win or am I going to lose, your first thought is, okay, let me keep my hands up, let me establish this range, let me move a little bit, and then there you go. There's the first 20 seconds. You didn't get knocked out, you didn't get caught with anything. You've got a good start. Let's work on the next part, which is start chipping away, and eventually getting to what you want. So for a lot of athletes that put a lot of pressure on themselves, so much so that it's detrimental, thinking about, are my goals outcome based right now, or are they performance based? Am I just thinking about the end result, or am I thinking about the steps I need to follow to get there? And usually that's a good way to kind of take some weight off your shoulders, relieve some of that stress, and go back into something that's actionable. Because again, winning isn't actionable, right? If you're about to walk into the ring and you're like, hey coach, what's my game plan? And they're like, your game plan is to win. You're like, what the hell? Right? It's not helpful. Right. The game plan is something specific. It's the keys to the fight that you want to be able to follow. So it's the same thing, right? You want to focus on those process-based goals that are actionable. So as soon as that match starts, you know exactly what it is that you have to do to find success, instead of just hoping that things come together so you can get that win because you made it all about the win.
Definitely, man. Hey, Dylan, I appreciate you coming on the show, man. Is there anything else that we want to touch on before we get you out of here? Is there anything important that we didn't gloss over? Anything that needs to be said that hasn't been?
Not really, man. I think this was great. I mean, if anything, it's just kind of reinforcing that point of wherever it is that you're coming from, there is so much that we can do, and it's definitely worth trying out, right? Whether you're that person that knows what they struggle with, whether it's confidence issues or motivation issues or fear of getting hurt or whatever, or you're a person who feels very confident, very motivated, very kind of tough. There's something for everybody in this, and it's always about kind of stretching out what you're capable of and becoming kind of that best version of yourself. I think the big misconception is, well, if I have no issues, is this even worth it? And it's like, of course it's worth it. You look at these fighters, it's like you could have incredible striking, but you still show up to your Muay Thai class. You still show up to your striking class. You could have a black belt at jiu-jitsu, you still show up and roll. So it's like, just because you're great at something doesn't mean that, it's not worth working on. It means that's even more reason to separate yourself from the pack further. So I think, whoever's listening to this, whether you're coming at it from one place or the other, there's always something in it for everybody, and it's definitely a cool thing to add to your arsenal, earlier on now, before your opponents start doing it and before everybody starts doing it, this is a great opportunity to take advantage of something new and upcoming and really get that edge before everybody else does.
For sure, man. And the people that do want to take advantage of these things now, and they want to, maybe after hearing this, they want to start working with you on some of these things, how can they find you and, contact you and all that stuff, and kind of, that avenue if they want to start doing some of that?
Yeah, so check out the Instagram. There's a lot on Instagram at MindLock with an underscore. There's a ton there, different content. You can take a look at who we work with, some case studies there. There's links to YouTube channel and podcasts and stuff like that, which is great. And send me a DM. Like I said before, I'm always on my phone checking that stuff. Touching base with athletes. Send me a DM if you're curious or you have a question. And also what we have that's pretty cool is it's like a fully online training course as well. If you go to courses.mindlock.ca, but the link is in the bio too, and it's a fully, all the curriculum is on there, video lessons, case studies from pro athletes, different activities and worksheets and assessments, tons of stuff to be able to and go through on your own time. It's great for if you're traveling or if you're on the go or if it's between training sessions. So being able to bundle, really our entire curriculum into an online, kind of training program and masterclass that athletes can do has been really cool for a lot of people. So that's another great, resource to check out as well.
Hell yeah, man. Well, thank you for taking the time to come on and talk to me, man. Like I said at the top of the show, I think what you're doing is extremely important to sports in general and mental health in general, and mental preparation. So, big props to you for developing this program, MindLock training, mental training, and, hopefully if this episode can help reach some athletes that will, be contacting you and get in touch with you as well. So thanks for taking the time to come on. And also, I want to say thank you to Julian Connerton and Dan Walsh. They're two of the fighters that, helped me develop some of these questions to ask you. They're a couple of fighters in the regional scene here. So thanks again, man. I appreciate you. And anything else you want to say before I get you out of here?
No, that's great, man. Thanks a lot for having me. This was awesome. And thank you to the fighters who, wanted to ask some questions. I think it was great to have some context from them. So this was great, man. I really appreciated it.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you very much, man. Take it easy. I'll be following along with what you're doing as well. So keep doing what you're doing, man. And the sky's the limit for you, man.
Thanks a lot, brother. Appreciate it.
Down for the count and he can't even talk now. This MMA, what we talking about? Yeah, you tuned into the pod now. Gonna be hard for you to stop now. Yeah, we caged in. Yeah, we caged in. Yeah, we caged in.